Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Naso here from IPR with the latest on the tropics. We do still have Tropical Storm Leslie, and we now have a new tropical storm named Michael. Very, very tiny, but also strengthening at this hour. Here's the latest Atlantic Basin unenhanced infrared, and you can see our two systems there. This one here is Leslie, which is looking a bit better organized after being exposed this morning, and it should strengthen from here on out into at least a Category 2 hurricane as it makes a close approach to the island of Bermuda. You can see Bermuda right there on that circle I just drew, and that is right in the crosshairs of Leslie. Behind Leslie there's Michael, very, very tiny, but looking a bit better organized this afternoon, and there is some indication that Michael might have a shot at becoming a hurricane as it meanders far from land, hundreds and hundreds of miles from the Bahamas and the islands, and similarly from the Azores. It's going to remain over water, but nevertheless could strengthen. And you can see another tropical wave here in the central Atlantic. We are only in early September, so don't think this is late season. We could still have Cape Verde systems, and some of the longer range models indicate we could have a significant Cape Verde hurricane that could go anywhere from the East Coast to the Gulf of Mexico in, say, 10 to 15 days time, but you're looking far ahead and you want to take that with a grain of salt. Let's get the latest on Leslie, since that is the one closest to land masses. As of 5 p.m., Leslie was at 25.3 north, 62.6 west. Winds were 65 miles an hour, gusting to hurricane force. It's moving north at 3. Very, very slowly. It was stationary last night, didn't move a whole lot. Today, it didn't move this morning. It's 994 millibars, and you can see this slow motion should continue through Friday and then become a hurricane, and from there begin to accelerate northwest and then eventually to the north, northwest, and north. By Sunday afternoon, we could be dealing with a pretty strong hurricane passing by the island of Bermuda, and if that's the case, Bermuda, you got to get your hurricane plan in place now, because you remember what happened back in '03 with Fabian. That was a Category 3 hurricane as it passed by you. This might not be that strong, but it might be. So we are really pressed for time here, because you know how fast time flies, and we're talking sometime overnight Saturday and Sunday morning. And with the wind field of Leslie, you could see the onset of tropical storm force winds well before then. Here's the satellite, and clearly at the beginning of this loop you can see Leslie was sheared from the northwest, the exposed center here. Note what happens at the end. A much more dramatic blow up of convection directly over the low level center, but you can see it sits on the edge of dry wind shear error here to the west and a much more favorable flow here to the east, and that's kind of creating a lopsided strong tropical storm, with the expectation that if convection bursts over this and the west side fills in, we will then see intensification into a hurricane. So Leslie is not going away, I can tell you that much. It will not dissipate or anything like that, but it needs to get in a bit more favorable environment before it could become a hurricane. Now the same is true for Tropical Storm Michael. It's at 27.5 north, 43.7 west, way out there, as I mentioned. I mean, you're talking a huge distance from Bermuda, or the Lesser Antilles, or the Bahamas, or even the Azores off the map here, and Nova Scotia and the Canadian Maritimes. This is way out there, pretty much as far away and isolated as you could get a tropical cyclone to be. And just like Leslie is drifting very slowly towards the north-northwest, is at 6 miles an hour, a little faster than Leslie, 1,006 millibars. The winds are up to 50, and it is forecast to strengthen close to hurricane strength by later this weekend and begin a slow, and I do mean a slow, bend back towards the west, with the likelihood after that it would then eventually get sucked out with Leslie and not really be a feature for anybody. Here's the wind field of Michael, and when we say it's small, this might be one of the smallest tropical cyclones ever observed. This is only a little bit bigger tropical storm force winds than Marco back in 2008 in the Bay of Campeche, which was also very tiny. Michael could possibly get a little bigger a wind field as it expands and elongates when it starts to head out, but as of right now, very tiny. But you can see there's no land. There's no land anywhere on this map for any of those winds to go. So maybe a fish will be the only one impacted by high winds from Tropical Storm Michael at this point in time. That's what we are looking at right now. Now here's the latest on Michael, and you can clearly see at the end there, note the warming here. It is trying to build what appears to be maybe an eye wall, some warming near the center, very, very tiny, and you can see these winds coming in on the west side are going to begin to impact it and shear it. So it's got a little window of opportunity here to strengthen in the short term, but if it does become a hurricane, which right now is not in the forecast, but if it were to, that would probably happen later. Nonetheless, Michael is a tiny little system, but it does appear to be building and strengthening a little bit at this hour. Now the GFS model, I did want to note, does take Leslie directly into Bermuda, more or less, as a hurricane, although with an island that small, whether or not you'd be in the eye wall or just hurricane winds or just tropical storm force winds is unknown. But look at how fast Leslie just sits there in its current location. I mean, it barely moves for days and days and days, and then it finally ends up moving out after impacting Bermuda and doesn't threaten the eastern coast other than just high swells. You can see Michael there following in her footsteps as that strengthens a little bit there, moves west, and then gets sucked up. Now off Africa, there is a tropical wave, and there is one about to exit Africa, and the GFS model and others in the longer range have been showing development of this system into a hurricane. And I've seen some model runs take it on a track similar to, say, Hurricane Earl of 2010. I've seen other tracks take it more towards the Yucatan and the western Gulf of Mexico, which leaves a region of literally probably 1,000 miles for error. So you're talking a grain of salt, long range, but remember, we are still not even to the peak of hurricane season, which occurs in about 6 days' time, and by that time we could have a system coming off Africa, and the next name on the list, if it does become a significant tropical cyclone, would be Nadine. So whether or not this is Hurricane Nadine in the making, we will have to wait and see. 2012 so far has been an active season for named storms. I mean, we are, I believe, the third most earliest M-named storm, and we continue to see the prospect for further storms down the road. But what do you notice? First of all, we do have some tracks here that are off to the west. We saw Isaac make it very far west, and that was the most significant cyclone of the season so far, and that was only a minimal hurricane, Category 1. We did have some close to land development here. We did have Ernesto, of course, which was a classic August long track Caribbean hurricane. And now we had Kirk, Category 2, Gordon, Category 2, and Leslie is forecast to be a Category 2, but still no majors. Still no major hurricanes. And that is very strange. Now, if Leslie becomes a major hurricane, if we get a major hurricane Nadine off of Africa, then we might begin to catch up. And remember, we still got a long way to go. But a lot of storms out here in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of weaker storms in the Caribbean in this region. But overall, nothing overly significant. And if the U.S. does not get hit with a major hurricane, which this system off Africa might be the last shot this year. Of course, anything can happen in the late season, but if we get a long track September hurricane like that, that might be the last shot at a Cat 3, 4, or 5 for the U.S. You're literally talking about 7 hurricane seasons without a major hurricane landfall, which is very, very rare. So we're going to wait and see what happens there, but nonetheless, stay prepared, because you never know what might happen. I'm Mike Naso. I will see you all next time.